So, given that the Reid technique results in greater likelihood of false confessions, um, in 2009, President Obama approved the search for information that would lead to a science based interrogation technique for law enforcement, ranging from city police to CIA operatives. Their aim was to develop a robust evidence based perspective on effective methods of military intelligence and criminal interrogations that are both legal and ethically sound. Um, this is the just as the general visual of how this interrogation looks. So starting with cooperation, they're moving on to elicitation, so trying to get questions answered, and then evidence presentation, so how do you share what you know with the suspect, and then assessing credibility, so trying to determine if the suspect is lying or not, using different techniques from the Reid technique. Culture and language, I won't really discuss just because that's beyond the scope of this lecture and it is more relevant to military interrogation. But this new high value detainee interrogation group known as HIG is moving towards being the new type of interrogation technique that we hopefully will end up using because of the positive outcomes from it. So while there's no agreed upon definition of interrogation, most definitions reflect that it is a formal process that includes mostly accusatory questioning designed to obtain information a detainee views as personal or secret. In contrast, the HIG assumes that the purpose of an interrogation is to obtain valuable intelligence, thereby attempting to decrease motivated reasoning of investigators or trying to fit information into a narrative that they believe occurred. So the purpose of performing an interrogation under HIG is to obtain any and all information that could be relevant in any way. Traditional interrogation usually involves officers assuming that they have guilty party in interrogation, and they're trying to get the information they pull from them to fit the narrative that they think happened. So this differs pretty tremendously from the Reid technique or just traditional interrogation techniques in the United States. This way, the old way of looking at things, a more traditional way, ends up causing investigators to overlook information that might be useful to determine someone's guilt or not. So as a result of HIG, there are now more than 100 published peer-reviewed articles that relate to this high-value detainee interrogation and how best to conduct an interrogation to get accurate information from suspects. And so going over the 100 plus studies that looked at these methods, FBI Director James Comey delivered a report in the summer of 2015 that summarized findings and found that the most effective interrogation techniques are individualized or otherwise do not follow a cookie cutout method. So there's no like prescription for every interrogation. That they're flexible, so they change as information comes in during the interrogation or as information comes in otherwise. And then it's based in rapport, so building this relationship between the suspect and the interrogators is important. And it's also the goal of the HIG is information gathering. So of the 100 studies and of the summarization of those, these were some of the most important components of an effective interrogation, ranging from low-level misdemeanor suspects all the way up to terrorist threats. So it doesn't really matter who the suspect is. These methods should work in some form or another. So of of the methods in the HIG, I'll highlight them broadly. Interrogation is a team effort. So interrogation under the HIG is considered a team effort that includes a team leader or primary investigator, a primary interrogator, and trained observers that can provide feedback and perspective of the interrogator's methods and behavior, which is particularly useful in this type of interrogation. So there are people who are watching the interrogation and providing feedback. Individuals observing the interrogation are generally more effective at monitoring the interrogator's behavior than the interrogator. So thus, these observers use the interpersonal behavior circles, which I'll show you in a moment, as a model to assess the extent to which the interrogator's interaction with the detainee remains adaptive and productive. So one or two interrogators interact with the suspect or detainee, and the others observe to provide this feedback and follow-up information so that they can better gauge how to talk to the suspect and extract information from them. So to provide feedback, like I said, the observers are using this interpersonal behavior circles that are based on extensive research, and they depict adaptive and maladaptive behaviors. So the adaptive behaviors are on the left and the maladaptive behaviors are on the right. Research shows that the behavior of the interrogator directly influences both and positively and negatively how the detainee or the suspect behaves. So observers note the positions on the wheels of the interrogator and the detainee, and then as the team aims to have both individuals or both people exhibit the adaptive behaviors on the left wheel. So if the detainee or the suspect is showing maladaptive behaviors that are on the right wheel, that behavior is noted, and then the corresponding adaptive behavior is identified and noted, and the interrogator attempts to exhibit that corresponding adaptive behavior. So, for example, if a detainee is passive and resentful, which you see on the right side in a faint purple color, the interrogator attempts to exhibit behavior that is supportive and conversational. So you're matching up these colors on these wheels to try and move the suspect away from the maladaptive behavior to the adaptive. So what's going to be adaptive for the interrogators to then get the answers that they need. Interrogators frequently identify similarities. They use humor and they leverage information to facilitate liking, while they are more hospitable and sympathetic so that they can address a subject's needs, because giving suspects this feeling that they are cared about or in some way and have some agency usually results in them sharing more information. Another component is preparation. So the team is tasked with identifying what they know definitely and what they believe to be true so that they can make logical inferences about the motivations of the suspect. So doing this type of preparation allows for investigators to try and gauge how they should question the suspect and how they will respond to various approaches. And then the team, so this might look a lot like research, as the investigators gather as much information as possible in as little time as possible and try to connect the dots. So ideally, this process keeps the investigators focused on what they know and what they need to learn in order to avoid trying to force information that fits this predetermined narrative. So during the preparation, the team develops a plan of questions and objectives of questioning. That this might involve planning what questions to ask first, and then how to ask them, and how to present evidence to the suspect when they provide information that is inconsistent with factual information. So the ultimate plan is to draw out as much information that the suspect or detainee knows so that they can find holes in their stories or fact check it. One of the main themes or variables that have been identified by Higg as most important in interrogations is cooperation between the interrogators and the person being questioned. So building rapport has been defined as a working relationship between operator and source based on this mutually shared understanding of each other's goals and needs. Rapport often begins with the interrogator developing a common understanding with the detainee of the purpose and the scope of the interrogation rather than hiding their motives. So this occurs throughout the interrogation as the interrogator notes the detainee's needs and motivations and allows the suspect a sense of agency within the interrogation because letting a suspect feel some sense of control results in more favorable outcomes. There have been some tactics that build rapport. So some tactics that have been identified to build rapport do not differ from regular rapport building in personal relationships. So I imagine many of you, like myself, have heard your mother say something like, treat others the way that you want to be treated. Well, if you want a suspect to divulge personal information, and crime is typically a deeply personal tidbit of information, then you need to treat them with respect and share some of your own personal information. So more specific tactics identified in studies examining rapport building have identified these behaviors as beneficial. So immediacy behaviors, making eye contact or leaning towards the suspect when they're talking in a friendly fashion, active listening, I'll elaborate more on later, mimicry, so kind of just doing what that person is doing to a very, basically a non-noticeable degree, contrasting emotions, so you're saying, you're kind of parroting back this, like, it sounds like that you're angry. Why is that? And then disclosing personal information, establishing some sort of common ground, like, oh, we both enjoy this activity. And then frequency of contact. So just kind of like continually being engaged in this conversation as if it matters to you, and it should. Once rapport is built to a degree the suspect is willing to divulge information, it's important to encourage conversation on their part to, again, validate information that may point to their guilt or innocence. So active listening not only builds rapport, but also aids in obtaining information that can be used during interrogation. Again, advice from your mother may make you a better interrogator. So suspects should be doing most of the talking as the interrogator is trying to obtain useful information. Some skills that might encourage conversation are the use of encouragers. Encouragers are saying things like, yeah, or nodding your head to indicate that you are following along with what the suspect is saying, and then paraphrasing and summarizing, otherwise parroting what the suspect has shared. So just saying, oh, okay, so just to be clear, you told me that Susan left the house at this time. Okay. Just reporting back to what you heard to show that you are listening. And then mirroring and reflecting their behavior, which is shown to increase likability and openness. So kind of just, again, this is like mimicry. And then emotion labeling or validating how the suspect appears to be feeling. So again, it seems like talking about situation A makes you angry. And then silence is also a powerful tool, as people often are uncomfortable with silence and will try to fill it with anything. It's interesting to hear what people fill silence with when they're uncomfortable. So going deeper into this funnel method, the interrogators were previously using it to try to get conversation out, and now they're going to start asking specific questions that they might have evidence for, and they're presenting that evidence to the suspect. So it starts with the team carefully evaluates all available evidence about a particular topic in terms of its source and the degree of specificity. So the suspect tells a story about a particular topic uninterrupted. The interrogator might say, well, tell me about how you met so-and-so. And then the suspect repeats the story while the interrogator asks follow-up questions. So the interrogator might say, okay, so you told me how you met this person, and maybe they wait a certain amount of time or they ask immediately, but they say, I just really want to hammer down exactly how this happened. So I listened to how you met them. Now I have a couple questions, so can you just walk me through this again? Once the details of the specific question or objective are met, the interrogator introduces a piece of evidence or intelligence in terms of a vague source and low specificity. So, for example, the interrogator may say, you claim that you were at your friend Michael's house, but you were seen in town. So can you explain that to me? Specifically, they're not providing the source and or how specific it is. They didn't say who told them, and they didn't say exactly where. It's just, well, we saw you in town, but you say you were here. I don't understand why these two stories don't match up. Can you explain that to me? And then the interrogator moves on and asks the detainee to explain, and that the and they might say the specific gas station, and then they say, can you explain that to me? So now they're saying we have a video of you and we have you at a gas station. These aren't false evidence ploys. These are real, these should be real evidence, genuine evidence that the interrogators have, that they just very slowly provide more details to kind of demonstrate, to get more information out of the suspect before they play all of their cards. So then in the Higg, deception detection is a part of it, but there is no reliance on nonverbal cues. So relying on nonverbal cues for deception detection is not a statistically reliable method. The team looks for verbal cues, including the presence of quotations, complications, verifiable details, and spontaneous corrections in the detainee's narrative. If they find these things in these verbal cues, which have been scientifically found to be indicative of some level of deception, then they might try to hone in on those details and figure out what is going on. So the interrogator may obtain an initial narrative from the detainee and then ask for a second narrative, instructing the detainee to provide more details. The narratives are then compared, and a judgment regarding deception is made primarily using an aforementioned verbal cues. One tool that they might use is getting the suspect to have some sense of cognitive load, so that it's more difficult for them to stick to their lie. So if the team believes the detainee is being deceptive, the detainee can be asked to draw a sketch while answering questions. For a truthful detainee, this task draws out more information, and for a deceptive detainee or suspect, it makes it more difficult for the suspect to retain a resistant, deceptive stance, because simultaneously sketching and answering questions as well as being deceptive requires significant cognitive resources. So if you're telling the truth, it's not so hard to draw a picture of a specific place that has to do with your story, but it is hard to do that when you're already having to use more effort to make up this lie. Another tool that they might use is this unanticipated questions. So unanticipated questions also aid in the identification of deception. The team analyzes the scenario and predicts what questions a detainee would and would not have anticipated. Process and explain and planning questions and spatial questions typically fall into this category. So cognitive load increases when the detainee is faced with such questions, making it more difficult for him or her to maintain a deceptive posture. So once the interrogators have kind of walked the suspect through this program of cooperation, elicitation, or questioning, and evidence presentation, they'll end the interrogation with concluding remarks. So they're concluding the interrogation with the suspect. So they provide a summary of what the suspect has said. So they kind of pair it back to them and say, okay, so you're telling me that you were here at this time and that you couldn't have committed the crime because blah blah blah. And they provide as much detail as they can to the story that they have from the suspect, and they allow them to correct or expand on certain parts of it. And then if future interrogations are anticipated, the suspect is provided with those of what that may look like. Okay, we'll probably be contacting you in the future to ask you more questions, but the suspect is left with a feeling that future contact will be a positive experience, so that they're less likely to try to evade questioning again. So, and if they get a confession, or it's finalized, then the interrogation is concluded in that way. And again, allowing the suspect to correct or expand on something so that they have the most information that they can get going to trial or moving forward in some other way. So you can see how this differs pretty dramatically from the Reid technique, as the Higg program is trying to use cooperation as their way of getting suspects to provide information. So you don't have to raise someone's anxiety so high that they then, just out of error or out of inability to think clearly, provide you information. Now it's I'm trying to build this cooperation so that social influence and rapport will cause you to want to give me information. I've been to a talk by the lead investigator of Higg, Christian Meissner, and some of the questions from the crowd conveyed that they didn't really buy that the Higg technique worked. And with over 100 studies under their belt, and with viewing this in action, it appears that the Higg does work, and that people are just more inclined to give you information, even if it's harmful to them, if you deal with them in this way. The rate of confession, true confession, is actually higher under Higg, and additionally, false confession rates drop dramatically in these scenarios. So hopefully, like some other places in the world, like the United Kingdom, the United States will move in this direction of interrogation techniques.